Well, the Ohio State Buckeyes are ready for another season with, once again, high expectations as we welcome in Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Huddle. Gerd, thanks for joining us on College Football Weekly.
Good to be here, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about this Ohio State offense. You lose two first-round wide receivers in Chris Olave as well as Garrett Wilson, and Jamison Williams, who left to go to Alabama out of Ohio State, also a first-round wide receiver last year in the NFL draft. Yet some are expecting this offense to be even better this season. How is that possible?
That's possible because expectations get crazy around Columbus. That's how it's possible. But realistically, what you're looking at here is the offense from the Rose Bowl, basically. And that was a very good offense. And it's an offense this year that sounds like rededicated itself to running the ball. They're still going to throw it all over the place, but they want to be able to run it better. And if you're a better running team than they were last year, that makes you a more difficult team to defend through the air as well. Ohio State could be one-dimensional last year, which makes it a little easier to defend them. And they did struggle at times against some of the better defenses. So if they're more 50-50 more balanced this year and really able to run the ball when they want, when Justin Fry was hired, a new offensive line coach, he said he wants to be able to run the ball when everybody in the stadium knows that the run is coming. So they've rededicated themselves to that. And if they can do that, if they're as effective and as dangerous running the ball as they have been throwing the ball under CJ Stroud, I think you have a better offense than last year.
Let's talk a little bit about that offensive line. They wanted their best 5 O-linemen on the field last year, which meant they really had 4 tackles out on the field. This year they'll have 2 tackles and 2 guards. Paris Johnson moving to what is seen as his natural position, tackle. Is that part of the reason why you think that running game is going to be back, is the fact that we're going to have some guards this year? You're going to have maybe a little bit of a stronger interior offensive line?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ryan Day has said as much without saying exactly those things, but he likes having guards at guard, and they have the leverage and they're able to push, and they're more adept at run blocking because that's what they've been doing their entire offensive line lives, rather than you bring in tackles who this is the first time playing guard really. And so it's a new position for them, even though they've been on the offensive line forever. It's different. And now you bring in 2 guards, Matt Jones, who's been around forever and played a lot, has a handful of starts. I think he fits in just seamlessly. And Donovan Jackson, the other guard, was the top guard in the recruiting class last year as a true freshman. Paris Johnson said today, if you were able to play 6 offensive linemen in a game, Donovan Jackson would have been that guy last year. So tells you how advanced he was as a true freshman. They also used him, remember, as a blocking tight end, and that's a lot to ask of a true freshman. So he's a very athletic left guard that could eventually become a left tackle down the road. So they really like what they have in these 6'4", 6'3" guards rather than the 6'6", 6'7", 6'6" guys that they had last year.
With all the talent returning on offense, the scheme solid on offense, we can nitpick offense. Other side of the ball, defense, wholesale changes. We understand why, because the defense really let them down at times a season ago. Jim Knowles comes in as the new defensive coordinator, and based on what we saw from Jim on Tuesday, he is quite relaxed going into this top 5 showdown with Notre Dame.
It almost felt like he's already seen the score, and he's like, look, I have nothing to worry about. I know how this thing is going to go. And really, I think he has this view of his defense that he feels very, very good about it. He feels good about how he's going to utilize them. Probably feels good that the Notre Dame offense isn't in week 7. You've got a new starting quarterback, and I know those of us on the Ohio State side of things are looking for the concerns with that. Imagine this is now Tyler Buchner's first start for Notre Dame. He's going against a completely new defense, an aggressive defense, not necessarily knowing exactly what he's going to see. I think that favors Ohio State in between the unknowns of those two sides of the ball. And I think Jim Knowles knows that. And this is a guy who is now at Ohio State and has more talent at his disposal than he's ever had before. And it gives him a lot of different options. And I think what he likes best is that the players have picked up on the defense very quickly. They want to do well. They want to be great. And so they've been locked in since probably February in terms of learning this defense. So it gives him confidence, and from what everybody's telling us, what we're seeing, what the coaches are saying, this is a much faster defense because they understand it and they know their roles and they get employed to go and hammer people now.
You're telling me that a young quarterback might struggle in an early season showdown against a Power 5 school? Certainly Ohio State doesn't understand what that's all about, as you remember what happened with J.T. Barrett's second start against Virginia Tech, C.J. Stroud's second start against Oregon a season ago. So I think that could be a key factor. Another interesting thing is the fact that Notre Dame last season in their bowl game under Marcus Freeman went up against Oklahoma State, which is where Jim Knowles came from. Now, Jim Knowles was not on that Oklahoma State staff for that bowl game, but his system was very much in place. And I think all sides have basically said, we can't really take anything from it, yet we kind of can take something from that.
Jim Knowles was asked about that last week. He's like, he was asked, "What is this an advantage for you that you get to see how Notre Dame's offense operates against your defense?" He's like, "Well, I don't know if it's an advantage, but I like it." Like, he likes the fact that he's gotten to see how they operate. So yes, it's clearly an advantage. And this is another instance where, is it better for Notre Dame or is it better for Ohio State? I think Jim Knowles feels like it's better for him because he's already kind of gotten to see what Notre Dame does against what they think they're going to see from Ohio State. And now you just change some things up, but it also comes down to the adjustments. And that's something that Jim Knowles prides himself on, being able to adjust on the fly. You don't need to wait till halftime to make some changes. You can do it on the fly because everybody understands the defense.
Notre Dame comes in. Marcus Freeman, first-year head coach, did coach them in the bowl game. Former Ohio State linebacker, a four-time Big Ten champion with the Buckeyes. Also on that coaching staff, former Ohio State linebacker James Laurinaitis. Good friends with Marcus Freeman. You can understand why James went to South Bend to coach with Marcus Freeman, and former Ohio State linebacker coach Al Washington. Ryan Day said today there's a lot of crossover between these two staffs, so there is certainly a lot of familiarity between Ohio State and Notre Dame, even though they haven't played against each other in the regular season since the 90s. A couple of Fiesta Bowl appearances against each other in the recent history as well, but a lot of familiarity.
Yeah, a lot of familiarity. I don't know how friendly the handshakes are going to be before the game, because I do think there's some animosity between both sides, and they won't tell you that, but just from the people that I've talked to, there's been some back and forth in terms of, did James Laurinaitis really have an opportunity at Ohio State? Ryan Day said they talked. Other people will tell you that, well, they didn't really. Al Washington being let go from the job, and from the job at Ohio State, having to go to Notre Dame. And then, of course, Marcus Freeman had the same issue with, did Ohio State talk to you about defensive coordinator? And so there's a lot of, rumors in the winds, and they'll be friendly face to face, but obviously they both want this one very, very badly. You mentioned James Laurinaitis and Marcus Freeman. I remember covering them early in the days when they were playing at Ohio State. James Laurinaitis, obviously his father, Joe, famous wrestler, one of the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors. And those two, Marcus Freeman and James Laurinaitis, talked about being a tag team after their playing days. I didn't realize this is what they meant, though.
Let me ask you this. Ohio State, 17-point favorite in the last line. Is there more pressure on Ryan Day or Marcus Freeman Saturday night?
I think there's more pressure on Ryan Day. If you're a 17.5-point underdog, a win for you is losing by, 16 points, basically. So I know Marcus Freeman was told about that line, and, he jotted it down to tell his team later. I think Ohio State would be just fine with a 1-point win, because it's about winning one and then getting to the next one. But I do think all season long, there's going to be pressure on Ryan Day. There's going to be pressure on Ryan Day until he beats Michigan, because it's been, since 2019. So he's 1-1 against them, and you don't want to go 1-2. So I think all season long, there's going to be pressure on Ryan Day.
And Ryan Day alluded to that on Tuesday, said there are no big heads on this team after last season. Ohio State playing a home game against a non-conference Power 5 opponent. That has not been a good recipe for success of late. They're 4-5 in their last 9 matchups like that. Those 4 wins came 2010 against Miami, 2011 against Colorado, 2012 against Cal, and then Oregon State a couple years ago. None of those were premier matchups. And if you look at non-conference Power 5 night matchups for Ohio State, they haven't won one of those since 2003 in Washington. What has been Ohio State's problem playing those big marquee primetime games in the shoe?
That's a good question. I'm guessing they were probably favored in just about all of those games. And so these are situations where Is the moment too big for the team? Is it a young team at the wrong time? I think there's I don't know that there's one answer. Maybe it's a different answer each time, but there's a lot of pressure in playing big games early in the season, night games. They make them even bigger. But yeah, it's interesting. Maybe that's a good science project to go through and see, like, what are there any common denominators here other than the fact that you're playing a pretty good team? Like that's the most common denominator, right? Like you're playing a team that can beat you because they just did.
Ohio State and Notre Dame both said the key to the game is going to be running the ball, stopping the run. Do you subscribe to that theory on Saturday night?
Yeah, I do, because these are two physical teams. Well, an Ohio State team that says they're going to be more physical. Notre Dame has to be physical because they don't really have all of the skill that you need to be less physical. So they're going to have to win it at the line of scrimmage as well. So yeah, I'm thinking, this Ohio State offense, that Notre Dame defense needs to win that line of scrimmage and like attack CJ Stroud a little bit, make him uncomfortable. Because if you're going to sit back in coverage and make him dink and dunk, I think he's okay with that. Like he'll just take what you give him, and then maybe the receivers can turn it into more. I think you got to put some pressure on him, and that starts up front. And it'll be interesting to see how much help those defensive lines get. Is it 5-man rush? Is it 6-man rush? But yeah, the team that runs, kind of like the Ohio State Michigan game, the team that runs the ball better, I think, is going to win.
Thank you very much, Tony Gerdeman. You can read him on BuckeyeHuddle.com. And Tony, I know you got several other platforms as well. How else can folks get more of Gerd?
Yeah, you can obviously BuckeyeHuddle.com just launched that in the past few weeks. So check that out. Brand new site, vibrant community. We'd love to have you there. I'm on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman. And the podcast is the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. And now that the season is here, we're basically a daily show. So check that out on all of your podcast platforms of choice.